this was a very tough and hard year for cinema, and but it is a very good and interesting news that uh, Fandor has been acquired by Cinedig. So I'm wondering if you can say more about this acquisition.
Yeah, well, thanks. It's great talking to you. So Cinedigm has recently acquired Fandor. They've also acquired my company, which is the Film Detective, and together between the Film Detective and Fandor, we're going to be rolling out a big initiative for this pandemic times. You know, not being able to go into the movies the way we used to. Thankfully, being at home, we've had a lot of opportunities to stream the media that we love and see the movies that we miss seeing on the big screen. So Cinedigm is a company that is a multimedia company, and they really appeal to the independent spirit. A lot of their content and the channels that they currently have feature a lot of indie films, and Fandor has always celebrated independent film making and the independent film community, not just with the curation of the films, but also through the editorial in working with journalists like yourself and others who love to talk about film and write about film. So in addition to Fandor, there's the editorial component called Keyframe, which we will be working with journalists all over the world to talk about the film, cinema history, come up with some sort of editorial engagement so the customers and the viewers get an experience, not just, you know, like when today you go to a streaming platform, you see the movie and you don't really understand why you're seeing it and it's hard to navigate. We're going to try to contextualize the films to kind of a time and a place and a story about them so we have better user engagement. So it's an exciting time. Fandor, I was a fan for years. They started out long before streaming became really a huge mainstream thing, and they had the right idea, but they were also very early in adopting a streaming technology platform. Now that with COVID and the pandemic, everyone is sort of fully engaged in streaming platforms, we know that this is the future. Even though at some point soon we hope we'll be back in the theaters and going to festivals and independent film production will be up and running again. This has been a time of being at home, and being at home means you hopefully have alternatives to the mainstream, and Fandor has always been a wonderful alternative because they've curated films from all over the world, not just films from this country, but films from Japan and films from Turkey and films from the Netherlands. So there's a lot of cinema that gets grouped together in the curation process. And I think that this is what's exciting, is that we're going to try to really build out a global community of independent films.
As you mentioned, streaming service is becoming very popular, especially after the COVID time, and now you are facing big companies like Netflix or Amazon. I'm just wondering how you want to survive, or how you want to work in this situation in which you are facing being competitors, and what aspects of funders you want mostly to put emphasis to make your brand unique.
Yeah, no, it's really about an alternative. So if you think about your radio stations, there's a radio station that plays the top 40 hits, and then there's other radio stations that might be further down the left side of the dial that play an eclectic mix of new music, and there's music discovery. So I think that the key thing now is all the mainstream platforms are showing the mainstream movies, because that's sort of the bulk of the eyeballs in the audience. You're going to see your same romantic comedies that you're going to see on several platforms. And certainly Disney, they're a franchise upon themselves that can sustain a large following with their catalog. But when you get to independent filmmaking and film libraries from all over the world, there isn't currently a destination that fully engages with editorial, that does a deep dive and kind of walks you through it from a historic perspective and also from an engagement perspective. So I think that's sort of a little bit unique, that you don't get that with the other platforms. You get, the mainstream stuff, but you don't get the deep dive, and you don't get sort of a lot of the alternative cinema or a lot of the documentaries. And I don't think that filmmakers should necessarily have to think that unless they make a movie, if Netflix doesn't pick it up, then it's a bust. There should be alternatives for the film community to celebrate these movies and have alternative platforms. And it's healthy. I think that it's not competition. It's just having an alternative. I mean, television was the same way. You had, a couple of stations early on, and eventually over time with cable TV, you had multiple cable networks that did different things, from news 24/7 to, uncut movies to sports. And streaming platforms are pretty much the new kind of paradigm shift of that. They're now coming up with their own programming to appeal to people who are cinephiles, who appreciate cinema, who want to see something other than just the mainstream stuff.
I had the pleasure of working with K-Frame in the past, and I remember that in 2017, the K-Frame somehow dissolved. Mostly, it became a kind of video essays, and there was a argument that at that time funders want to more focus on a kind of broad or appealing cinema, not more just a kind of independent cinema. But from what you said, it looks like that the the new orientation or the new policy is mostly to return back to the independent works. Is it correct?
It is. It is. And I think that the mainstream platforms we will never compete with, nor do we need to. And I think that it doesn't mean we can't go after properties that are still well known, that have a following, because there's so much content out there, whether it's episodic or animation or documentaries or features. So I think that Keyframe really is kind of the opportunity now to re-engage with writers and bloggers. And there's a huge community of cinephiles. And we really want to kind of create a consortium of editorial members that help us within that community. We want to reach out to as many as we can, because ultimately the engagement of a film is only as good as your ability to talk about it and get people excited with film discovery. And that's really going to be an important part of our relaunch.
So you mean that because I remember that in the past 3 years, it was mostly came from a kind of video essays. So there was not concentration on textual analysis. So the textual analysis will be part of new K-frame, or just it will be continue with the tradition of video essay?
It will be both. There'll be video essays. It'll be a lot more difficult now to do any production in the video space, unless we're doing something like you and I are doing in Zoom. But it'll be a combination of video essays as well as written essays that reside in our blog. So Keyframe will have its own blog that we'll have contributors to. We'll also be using the Fandor website to promote that. And we'll look to eventually syndicate our live feed, which can go out to numerous locations as a live stitched linear feed that can go into syndication. So in addition to Fandor as it exists now, in the near future, there'll be a Fandor channel that will be embedded as a live feed that can go into multiple locations. And I think by us syndicating that, that will help us to distribute it to a larger audience by embedding it into the web as a player, and also as a streaming tool that we can syndicate to a blogger network too. And I think, this is just sort of the next iteration. This is just a different type of approach that we're really looking to editorialize as much as we can, but also we think that syndicating the live channel is going to be great because it gives people a flavor of what's on it. And if they like what's on the channel, they'll go deeper into the catalog.
And about the acquisition, in the press note, I read that you are going and hoping to reestablish a new partnership, working on the existing partnership for acquiring new titles. So I'm wondering if you can say more about this aspect of your strategies.
Yeah, so there's several hundred suppliers to the Fandor playlist currently. In the past 2 years, Fandor has been in limbo. It's been still live, but it hasn't had any new content because they've gone through a whole restructuring process. And now that we've been able to acquire Fandor, we're going to be getting in touch with all of the rights holders, all of the studios, the producers, and we're going to start looking for new content to refresh. We'll be looking to produce some original content in terms of interviews and short form content about the films. And of course, as we talked about earlier, we'll have a lot more going on with the blogger editorial side. And it's going to be dynamic. We're going to have this sort of as a living, breathing, non-static approach to our programming. And we're going to be looking to a global audience to expand, and also to global filmmakers so we can celebrate different countries. There's so many different countries that we'd like to reach out to include in Fandor, so it's more of a global indie platform.
Mhm. And about the criteria for acquisition, is it based mostly on the diversity, or do you have, for example, agenda ratio, for example, in terms of male or female directors, or in terms of, for example, black or white directors? So I'm just wondering if there is any kind of ratio, those kind of ratio in terms of film acquisition.
We're looking for good, compelling content from all walks of life. And it's just going to come down to, is it a great story? Is there a compelling narrative? Is the documentary a well-made documentary of an interesting subject? And we're going to go into a deep dive with that. So it's really all walks of life. We're not necessarily looking for one specific area. It's all encompassing. It's just going to come down to great content, good stories, and quality filmmaking.
Mm-hmm. And I realized that you were also the president of Film Detectives for several years, which was a very interesting film companies. And I wonder what will be its future in relationship with the new program.
So the Film Detective, we started in 2013. That was my company. I come out of the archival film world. I'm doing a lot of film restoration of older movies. So my background has always been restoring film and also celebrating cinema history. And Film Detective is still very much doing that. We have several libraries that we've recently purchased that will be going back in and making new 4K transfers and cleaning up a lot of the older films so they can have a new look to them. I think, what I love is making older content that wasn't readily available in nice versions. We reintroduce those titles back into the market again. And I think that fits in nicely too with Fandor, because Fandor always had classic movies. As much as they had new indie films, they had a great selection of older classic movies from all over the world. Short films, animation, films that were lesser known by small studios that celebrated everything from film noir to pre-code to older B horror movies. So the restoration of what we do with the Film Detective will benefit Fandor, and we'll be able to cross-pollinate some of the content that resides on the Film Detective, which is very heavy in classics. We'll be able to curate from the Film Detective library and push those out into Fandor and other platforms as well. But our mission has always been about preservation and restoration. And my libraries right now reside with institutions, everything from Warner Brothers to the Academy of Motion Pictures to UCLA to the Library of Congress. And these are the original elements. In some cases, these are one-of-a-kind nitrate films or film negatives from 80 or 90 years ago. So having that material to make new transfers to digitize so they look nicer is wonderful. But at the end of the day, they're still going to reside in the institutions, because this is a really critical part of cinema history to have these original films intact. So I've spent a lifetime collecting and amassing films over the years, and it's nice to have a home to show them outside of a few other locations that you might have had previously. The more opportunity to see classic movies and engage a younger audience, it's going to help the whole mission of what we do.
Mm. And in terms of platform that you hope to use for Fandors, on what platforms do you hope to broadcast the new program?
So we're building now the new linear channel, which we're hoping to have live sometime in either April or May. And currently Fandor is on Amazon as a Prime channel. It's in addition to their regular Prime. You can have it as an add-on. There is a web component too. There's also going to be a new app that gets redeployed in the coming months. So that will be on everything from Roku to Apple TV to Amazon Fire TV, iOS, Android. And eventually when the live channel feed comes out, we hope to populate that on to larger, some of these stitched linear platforms, not just domestically, but internationally as well.
Mhm. And in I'm just wondering if there is anything remains that you want to add in our conversation, anything that you feel is necessary to know about this new project.
Just that we're very excited that we're able to rescue Fandor. We were talking to them before I sold to Cinedigm. We were in negotiations to try to find a home for Fandor, and I shopped this around for over a year to different companies, and I think we've landed with the right home. They really understand what we're trying to do to reboot it, and I'm excited to keep Fandor alive. It would have been kind of sad if Fandor went away, because it would have been one less home for filmmakers to show their films. And we do plan on reaching out to film festivals, certainly the Toronto Film Festival. You guys have a wonderful annual film festival that we hope to participate in the coming years once we get through the COVID pandemic. But we do see ourselves reaching out to film festivals to engage with filmmakers and create a alignment and a venture together. So when filmmakers are having a proposition of making a film, they know that there's a Fandor out there. And we do feel like Fandor can create a wonderful team between movie theaters, independent theaters that are, kind of needing to have some kind of engagement with an audience to find ways to generate revenue. We feel like we can create a consortium of different groups between festivals and theaters and filmmakers. So that's really what we're excited about, is bringing it all together.